In this video, we will discuss several functions that can help you to iterate various sequences. The first function we'll describe is the enumerate function. This function takes a sequence as an argument and generates a tuple containing the index and the value for each element in the sequence. So if we have the list containing the strings tick, tack, and toe, and we wanted to iterate over the elements using a for loop, we would write for v in our list, colon, and then maybe we'll just print out each element in the list. And so if we also wanted the index of each element as we iterated, we can modify this loop using the enumerate function. And as we said just a moment ago, the enumerate function returns a tuple, so we can modify this loop to account for the index, which is the first element in the tuple. And so I write I comma v, and of course now we can print out I as well. So tuples will actually be covered in a future section. So for now, just know that the enumerate function will take a sequence like our list here and return to us an index and an element. In this case, we're using I and v to store those two elements. And so when we run this, you'll see that for each element, tick, tack, and toe, we get the index of those items in the list they came from. The next function is the zip function. If you find yourself in a position that requires you to iterate through two or more sequences at the same time, then you can actually use the zip function to help you with this. This function takes two or more sequences as arguments and generates a tuple containing an element from each sequence. The zip function stops generating tuples when one or more of the input sequences has been exhausted. So let's say we had these two lists, where the first list questions contains strings that will be inserted into a question, and the second list answers contains the responses to those questions. So similar to enumerate, we're going to write a for loop with element variables q and a. And these will be the variables in which we're going to unpack the tuple returned by zip during each iteration. And so we say in zip, and we pass our two lists as arguments to the zip function. Now note if I had 3 or 4 lists here, then we would add more arguments to the zip function. And of course, I'd have to add additional element variables as well. So in the body of this loop, we're going to print a formatted string. And we're going to use the format function to do this. So I'm going to type what is your, and then in curly braces, put 0 to represent the first argument that will pass to the format function. And then we'll say that for the answer, it is, and we'll use index 1 here. And then after the string here, we put dot format, and we pass q and a here as the arguments to the function. And so this format string will insert the value of q into index 0 here in the string, and the value of a into index 1 here in the string. Now, for those of you that went through the string notebook, this format method is actually an alternative to the f strings that we discussed there. And we can certainly replace this with an f string by prefixing an f and then replacing 0 and 1 with q and a respectively. But for this example, we'll stick with the format function. And we see in the output here that the elements from each list have been appropriately placed in the question and answer portions of each line of the output. So the zip function allowed us to iterate both lists simultaneously. Next, let's assume that you need to iterate through a sequence in reverse order, and you didn't want to modify your sequence in order to do that. So the reverse function lets us do exactly this. So to see this, let's write another for loop. And let's say we wanted to go backwards through a range from 1 to 10 that was taking steps by 2. So we're going to write for I in reversed, and now we're going to pass our range to the reverse function. So range 1 comma 10. And since it has a step size of 2, I'll write 2. And then for the body of the for loop, we simply print I. And when we run this, we see that instead of starting at 1 and going to 3, 5, 7, etc., it starts at 9 and goes backwards down to 1. So we use a range in this example, but the reversed function will work with any sequence. Similarly, if you wanted to sort a sequence, but you didn't want to modify the original, you could use the sorted function. So let's say we had the list basket, which contains fruit names stored as strings. And we wanted to print this list in sorted order, but we didn't want to modify the actual list basket. So we can do for f in sorted and pass basket as the argument. Again, we'll simply print f. And then to show you that basket has not been modified, we're going to print that out as well at the end. And so when I run this, you see that the for loop prints each string 1 per line in sorted order, and then the final print prints the original list showing that it has not been modified. So the reversed and sorted functions here are quite nice since they allow us to interact with our data in different ways without actually modifying the original sequence storing that data. Okay, the last function I want to show you here is the map function, which allows you to apply a function to each element of an iterable. Notice that I didn't say sequence here. An iterable is more generic than a sequence and refers to anything that you can iterate over or anything that you can loop over with a for loop. So we've already seen examples of sequences, namely lists and strings. However, sequences are ordered sets of elements, which means that they can be indexed and that they have length. Sequences are iterable, but not all iterables are sequences. A generator is an example of an iterable that is not a sequence. A generator will create the elements as it is iterated. For those of you that are interested, you can check out PEP 255 for a description of simple generators and also the yield keyword in Python. However, that's not necessary to demonstrate the map function here. So let's say we wanted to square the values in some range. We could define a function, square, that squares a single value like so. And then we can write a for loop to iterate the range 0 to 9, passing our square function and the range itself to the map function. So for every element in the range, the map will pass that element to our square function and yield that value to the for loop here, meaning that every iteration of the for loop will receive the result of our square function applied to the current element. So the output here contains the squares of the integers 0 through 9.